Curtis, thank you so much for coming on the show. Pleasure to see you. Pleasure to have you. You are based in the state of Utah, so we know each other through this community, and through everything you've built here, which is quite incredible. You are the founder and CEO of NURSA. Why don't we start with what is NURSA and how you became the founder and CEO of the company?
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for the time, Clint, and the connection as well. I'm excited to have a discussion today. Background on NURSA. NURSA enables facility managers in a healthcare setting who have short-term help needs, staffing needs, to connect with qualified nurses who can fill those short-term gaps. A very direct and transparent platform-based connection via software. It sounds pretty simple. Generally, that's because it is. It is pretty simple. But that hasn't been the way things have worked in the industry historically. Staffing agencies have long filled the gaps in all kinds of ways with talent whom they own the relationship with through employment. So it's a W-2 engagement. They then go to these healthcare facilities offering a portion of their pool of talent to the facilities in need. And they generally are looking for longer term contracts. So this is historically, it's been more of a Nurse Nancy's leaving on summer break or for a longer term period. And we need to fill that gap for 12 to 16 weeks. There's often multiple parties involved in that discussion historically between the manager and the facility that needs the help and the nurse who wants to work. So it becomes this big adult game of telephone. And you can't solve for short-term needs very well at all, because just like the game you used to play on the elementary school playground, lots of people get involved. The message gets distracting or torn apart, and what goes in one side doesn't come out the other side in the same way. And so that was how I started. I bought an agency, and I really felt like ultimately we were helping to facilitate solutions. And it didn't take very long, 6 weeks, before I realized that we're actually a part of a bigger, broader problem. And during that time period, I saw these shorter term needs that would just go unfilled. It's really hard to incentivize a recruiter to chase a 12-hour need when you had like an nearly endless stream of 12-week needs available. And so that shorter term, that per diem piece, that was where I got really interested. Backgrounds in product and engineering. And so working through how we might, compress the middlemen and create a digital switchboard where we could connect the two parties that needed to engage quickly. That was the hypothesis on which we started building the software to see if we could solve for that problem. Nurses, will go on and after the job is listed, request the shifts that they want to fill. The manager can then determine which nurse they want to schedule to fill the gap based on credentials or reliability, any number of quality pieces. And then if it works out, both parties can repeat. If it turns out that everybody's has a good time and that they want to repeat, we don't get in the way of interrupting serendipity. No fees to hire away or make a transfer to a full-time relationship with the facility. And in that sense, we're making the process more simple than it has been in the past. Getting exposure during the owning an agency was a really great way to start to facilitate solutions, and then has been an incredible place to build from, a foundation to build from.
How did you realize that this was a problem? I mean, what was your background? What was it like, the thing that switches, like, I need to start a company that addresses this?
Yeah, so had done a number of things in software, solving problems, and you really get into that game by just an itch that you can't scratch, right? I knew that from a young age, I knew that software could help facilitate better solutions, automation or augmentation, but had a chance to test that out in a whole bunch of relationships, built a number of different solutions. And the beauty of that was just getting to see lots of different problems. I had a friend who called me and said, you ought to look at this nurse staffing agency, a traditional agency, because this is a place where software hasn't quite got to yet. And I did. I was really impressed with the growth dynamics of the business, and then thought, as I went to visit headquarters, there was a mom and pop that were running the thing. There's a whiteboard, and on one side of the whiteboard, they're walking me through how they did it. One side of the whiteboard is orange sticky notes with nurse names. The other side of the whiteboard is green sticky notes with hospitals that had needs. The guy running it walked up to the whiteboard and said, making money in this business is this easy. Took a sticky note from either side. And you have a lot of thoughts at that point. But one of them was just, look, if I'm half of what my mother thinks I am with Excel, we ought to be able to compress and make this better, let alone the power of the internet as a verb. So that was where I got intrigued. Purchasing the business and understanding really quickly the dynamics of why that was problematic certainly was, you're buying the problem. And I think there are certainly better ways, fiscally safer ways to establish an understanding of the problem. But for me, so much of how I learn is getting in the thick of it. And there just was no better way to work backwards into what the industry needed. This was all pre-COVID as well. And so you're starting to get a sense of the problem, 2017, 2018, and then you build out the tech, bootstrapped and facilitated that through 2019, and really started to learn the dynamics of, can we get a manager who has a need and a nurse in the same place online at the same time, or in a close enough gap that we could solve for a problem tomorrow? And it was a pretty low bar to entry, because in the first year that we owned the agency and was working with that team to scale it out, these short-term per diem needs, 38% of them that we saw were dead on arrival. So literally, if I got a list of shifts today, 38% of them happened yesterday, the day before that, or the day before that. And so you were lagging. The facilities couldn't even get their hand up quick enough to get a response. On top of that, because of the incentive structure and just how tough it was to make these connections happen, there was just so much more revenue at stake on the longer term needs that the team dynamic, we didn't fill more than 15 basis points of a percent on all of those shifts that we saw that year. And so the question at the root of it was, well, do I think I could get visibility to at least 60, 70% of the jobs? That felt like a pretty low threshold to get there, and that would beat what I was seeing as the norm. And then the dynamic of, could we fill more than a percent? Because even that was going to be, 8 to 10x growth on what we had done with a manual headcount led solution. All of that felt pretty acceptable from a perspective of risk. Like, this is something we could throw money at, and I mean, heck, if you can solve 5% of the needs, you're doing amply better than what the agency could do. And that curiosity then led to, all right, well, this seems easy enough. Let's pump out the software. I'm a millennial at heart and by age, and so I think the other aspect of this was just that I had been the benefactor of a number of marketplaces as a consumer. I think economically, it's an incredibly pure business model. There's nothing special about my beliefs there. I just think it's efficient and one of the greatest illustrations of the capacity of the internet to go to work for us. And I loved the prospect of what marketplaces could do. And shortly after we started building, I really got the idea that we have access to both sides of this. There's a really good chance that we could build a marketplace product here and not have to be incredibly capital intensive. If I learned from the agency and then carved it out and grew from there. It was a really wild era, and then only compounded as we turned the corner into COVID. We got the app live March 3rd of 2020 in the
Well,
App Store.
perfect timing
Yeah,
because I mean, perfect and imperfect and awful timing at the same time.
yes,
Which is kind of crazy. But March 2020 is when COVID became real for everybody. Shutdowns and all that type of stuff started to come, and there was a crisis, if not still a crisis, of nursing shortages in hospitals. And like, tell me about that. Like, what was that like? You put this out 3rd of March 20, which again, you must have been like, what? How did we time that so perfectly?
it's often, as is often the case, you don't really get the chance to connect the dots looking forward. So much of it is as we look back now. Believe it or not, there was a period of about 4 weeks where I actually thought we couldn't have done this at a worse period of time. You were
Mm.
getting really mixed signals in the media about what COVID was going to be. New York was underwater by the time we'd been out for 10 days. But you're talking about offering a digital solution that is new to an audience that is traditionally and historically very slow to adopt operational tech, right? If you're throwing money at cancer to solve that problem clinically, there's all kinds of opportunities to push the boundaries. But operational sickness and logistical sickness, they solve in a much different capacity and had historically. And so I was really worried that this was going to go belly up, because what you would assume they would trust in that, what the industry would trust in that window, is to go back to solutions that had already proven out well, which meant trusting agencies to get them through this 100-year apocalyptic storm. And what ended up happening is that in those first 6 weeks, so into the middle of April, you start to get dynamics in the media that this was going to be bad. There was a general consensus that this was going to be bigger than what had originally been expected. And Stanford had published their data. You were starting to get refuting evidence there, and in that window, we started to see cases in Utah on the home front. And we had a conversation with a couple of folks during the legislative session on the Hill, and then some folks in a healthcare association here in the state, just asking them if there was anything we could do to help. And that dynamic led to a bunch of phone calls that were more or less Hail Marys. I mean, people that were saying, "Look, we've got to staff 22 of 26 nurses tomorrow, or we go belly up as an entity. What can you do?" And in a early adopter sense, there's often a few things that can exist. You get people who are early adopters who are technically proficient, right,
Mhm.
or digital natives, bleeding edge, or you get the other end of the spectrum, which is the technically desperate. And that certainly proved to be the case. And so the method of how we were delivering these things, there wasn't ever conversations about whether or not it worked. It was just literally, can you throw mud against this wall? And then what would happen is, as we solved for those needs day in and day out for weeks at a time, those conversations would then blossom into a very open, hey, remind us how you're doing this. And so you got to demonstrate and then educate, which isn't often the case outside of a moment in which the weather report is that there are big waves coming.
Yeah.
Just the timing of that was certainly providential, and half of that is the moment, the luck or the grace of the moment, and the other half of it is how quickly you roll up your sleeves and grab a shovel, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of shoveling in
Oh,
2020.
for sure. And so how fast has this company grown since then?
It's a great question. So we keep track of completed shift hours as the nurse goes to work, the manager gets the help that they need. That's the metric. We had from 2020 to the middle of 23, we averaged 67% month over month growth.
Wow.
I mean, just a massive. And so you start as this pirate ship. You're on the way. You want to become a Royal Navy. And inevitably, that means you end up in this corporate version of puberty, which is just being a crappy Navy. And so we went from pirate ship to crappy Navy really fast. And there have been pros and cons with that, certainly, that have come out of it. Lots and lots of learnings, nearly every week that we've been around. But one of the most exhilarating rides of my career, and as it stands today, by market penetration, from that perspective, we estimate that we're less than 1.5% penetrated today, which means that there's
Wow.
just tons of room to go.
Yeah, that is incredible. What does a typical day look like for you, Curtis? Like, how do you spend your day?
Yeah, it has varied from period to period, right? I mean, you as a startup founder, you take the beatings in every way that you can get them. Today, things are much more predictable than they ever have been. Certainly, still some room to move there, but I will start my mornings in the pool. I swim and regularly. That is just a great place to mentally begin. Usually early. My wife and kids will wake later in the morning, and so I've got a chance to be alone. Anything between about 5 and 6:30. I'll swim and then come home. I usually try to read, study some sort of just gathering, educational, religious. There's lots of sources there, but spend some time pushing my own boundaries and understanding, and then I'll get ready and head to the office. I try to capitalize on intellectually deep meetings between 7 a.m. and about 2 p.m. And then do any kind of communication work thereafter. I'm a big believer that you should be where you are. Email is the greatest threat to that existence, and so I will usually keep email to afternoons and evenings. There are certainly communication threads that warrant otherwise, but and then when we clean up in the evening, somewhere between 5:30 and 7, head for home, take care of kids, and do my best to help Stacy around the house. And then when everybody's in bed, I'll usually pick up 8:30 to 10:30 or 11, a couple extra hours of Slack, product movement, reviews, anything that I can help facilitate for the team to just hit the ground running on the next day.
How is AI affecting all of this? Because you started like in the middle of COVID, which was an incredible and, like you said, maybe even providential thing for the company. But now AI, and it's not like AI wasn't around when you started this thing, but now AI is kind of prevalent in the mainstream. Every company's thinking about it. How will it affect NURSA?
It's a great question. I think it will affect everyone. I'm certainly not opposed to the hype, but I think often this conversation gets overhyped as well. The practical realities of implementation are much different from, I think, the vision of things to come. And so there are a few ways that AI helps us today. One important facet of NURSA is that we decouple pricing. So what a clinician, how a clinician's value gets calculated on a shift, and what the facility's cost gets separated independently. Historically, that's been much different. It's been a singular relationship with the job. What is the value of the job, and then what does that mean for the clinician, and what does it mean for the facility in a cost structure? We leverage a number of machine learning models to facilitate dynamic pricing at the point of the shift. And what our commitment is to facilities in this is that you will not pay a penny more than it takes to fill the shift. We're pricing it to fill, and we can leverage math, and we can leverage machines to help drive that at a moment's notice in real time in the market. for either side. We leverage it from a content perspective as well. So generation of facilitating better understanding about a facility or about a particular license type, a specialty in a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, and have done great work there, both in content and then in how we're driving matchmaking. Those are three examples of real uses today. Where I think this can be applicable in the future, as a marketplace company, you act as the market maker. In some sense, we sit in the middle as a bureaucrat. And I think the ways in which we can drive exceptional experiences for either party in the way that we produce the market can have really long-standing and very lucrative impact for either in the way that they have an experience with the product. It's an interesting nut to crack, and I'd have to imagine that you're seeing some similar conversations, or at least having to rethink some aspects of your own approach
Absolutely.
with media and the conversations that you're having here.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. I think you're right. Everybody has to think about it, and it's going to affect everyone. And hopefully it's, productive and, additive and not, in my experience, and it sounds like in yours, it's been additive and been a really good thing for the company. Where did you land on work from home, in office, hybrid, that type of stuff? Where did you land on that kind of debate?
It's an interesting discussion, and I think as a general rule of thumb, it is often best to avoid polarity of any sort. And so, when we started, there's a period where hiring, because of what our cash situation was in the beginning, we did not have the luxury of going out to compete with real engineering talent from the coast in 2018, 2019. There are some interesting notes that emerge from that. About a third of our team today is in Utah. A third is elsewhere in the nation, and then a third is everywhere else. And so we have some aspect of all three variants of this at play. At a pirate ship stage, I think it would be very challenging to have a fully remote team. There are companies who have done it, Automatic, WordPress, 37 Signals. There are groups who are pioneering that and doing a great job with it. So much of the brainstorming, creative, driving agility of just acting fast and quick as a young company, I think gets hindered in this discussion if you go fully remote and don't have any previous work experience with the team and on the opportunity. As you grow in team sizes, I think some version of acceptance of all three has to be alive and well. There are certainly benefits to a staff base, a team, from a personal perspective, vacation, everyday work logistics that matters in the dynamic of being remote. So our policy today is one day in office every week. So we have Tuesdays in office with the team here. On a quarterly basis, we get the U.S. team together. So everybody comes in, and then on an annualized basis, we will visit or ensure that international base gets an in-person as well. We try to save as much of the team dynamic, so building trust and the foundation that way for those moments and events, and are very intentional about the way that we plan and structure those activities when we are in person. And then otherwise, the dynamic here is that our job is to enable and enable your ability to get the job done and defend the right that you have to go pursue that. And as a leadership team, we're incredibly committed to doing that on an individual basis. The more that this discussion starts to swing, the pendulum starts to swing back to in office, there are certainly dynamics of that are positive as well, beyond the brainstorming. I mean, just text transmission is really slow. Being able to open the door,
Mhm.
walk down the hall, have a 5-minute conversation, it carries weight, and it can compound. I mean, especially as you look at, Slack or Teams fatigue, overwhelming inboxes, like it can just get overwhelming. And I think there's probably an aspect of AI certainly in the making, where to help enable this better across the country. For us, it's an interesting dynamic because nurses and facility managers in Seattle don't care about what's happening in Salt Lake or Santa Fe. Our
Mhm.
markets are hyper local. Having boots on the ground matters. And another commitment that we make to facility partners is the idea that when you work with NURSA, you'll be working with someone who's experiencing at least the same weather that you are today. They likely love the same sports teams that you do, and have kids in the same leagues, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the internet is an incredible, unapproachable, imaginative beast in the cloud, but it's propped up on chopsticks and manual labor on the ground. Like how these things happen is very hyper local, and so it helps in our experience to have boots on the ground everywhere. But it certainly complicates the conversation as a team and how we think about these things. Short story.
Yeah.
We have some facet of all three of the variants of this discussion in play, and have had such since 2020.
Interesting. Hey, what are you reading, and what reading recommendations would you have for a community of CEOs and leaders?
Yeah, so I recently actually put together a pattern that has helped in reading. As you grow a company, it's been pretty tough. These are 2020 to 2024 are some of the lowest volume years for reading and just real intense learning of my own. I have found though that if I get the hardcover book, and I'm dedicated to hardcovers. Just a thing, just a tick. I love holding a book, and I get the audio version, and I read and listen at the same time. I can work through material quicker. Most recently, finished Super Communicators, which was a great read. I did a second pass through Adam Grant's Think Again. And then several other podcasts. I've got a few notes that way. Generally, when I'm listening, I will do it at time and a half. There are a few people that I will listen to at full speed. Michael Lewis, Malcolm Gladwell being two of those. I just finished Medal of Honor, which was Malcolm Gladwell's new podcast, and I loved it. Stories of Medal of Honor recipients. From a leadership perspective, I just think it carries a ton of weight to hear about these folks that moved and were moved to action in really incredible ways, even though the circumstances around them warranted otherwise. There's just no reason they should not have they should have done that. And so
Yeah.
I loved that. That's a sampling from what's been on my shelf this year. Yourself, what have you been reading?
I just picked up the book called Blitzed. Actually, one of our previous guests recommended it. It's about, and it has nothing to do with leadership, really. It's World War II and how drugs played a role in
No
the
kidding.
in the Third Reich, and in particular in Blitzkrieg, and all that type of stuff. It's kind of wild, actually. It's a really cool. And then I'm reading some other one about like the CIA. I can't remember what it's called, but I don't know why I'm like in that mode, but that's where I'm going.
What makes material engaging when you go to pick something up? Like what keeps you pulled in?
Well, one, it's got to be good writing, right? Don't you think? Like, you got to
I
have
agree.
some great writing. If it's too dense, I'm going to fall asleep, right? Or just move on, or that type of stuff. So, certainly, number one's got to be great writing. And two, it's just like learning about something like I was never taught in school that meth is why The Nazi regime was able to take France in 10 days, right? Like, that's crazy. And it's just fun. Anything that's like that, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn something really interesting and new, then I'm excited about it.
Yeah, new perspectives and a well-told story.
Yeah. 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 I
I think it's
totally
a
agree
great
with that.
summary. There's an aspect of it. How often will you find yourself applying or changing behavior or a habit based on what you read?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how much what I read changes habits in particular. Although I will say, and you probably read this book, Atomic Habits
Yeah, yeah.
certainly played an enormous role in my thinking. There's this other one, Anxious Generation, that I read recently.
Huh.
I have 4 kids, about social media and stuff like that type of stuff. I guess it kind of depends on the topic, but Atomic Habits and Anxious Generation had a major effect.
Yeah, I'll go through a variety of stages. Sometimes I want to read to push a boundary. Sometimes I want to read or listen to be entertained, and I'll usually know, a chapter or two into a book that, okay, this is the right moment for this book or not.
Mm-hmm.
I never think about it as leaving a book, just that I'll finish it later, right? And there's a pretty good healthy backlog of I'll finish it later.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that we get in a changing behavior or demonstrating merit to changing behavior. You get a lot of overly written concepts. So by the time you get to chapter 3 or 5, I've seen enough examples now. I know I
Yeah.
get the point. I don't need another 6 chapters of this, and so I always feel bad because the author, I mean, that was blood, sweat, and tears for some period of
Sure.
time, usually years, to do that. But if I feel like I've gotten there too quickly, it will also go into the we'll finish later. When I've forgotten these examples, I'll come back and read some
Yeah.
more.
There are some books that could have been blog posts,
Absolutely, absolutely. Or I mean, even a white paper, right? And so you get that kind of stuff can get old. I mean, your time's the most valuable resource that you have, and so if you're over investing in content that isn't moving the needle, like I think I try to be conscious of that. Um, from an entertainment perspective, I think we live in the greatest era of storytelling that there has ever been,
Yeah.
and there is all kinds of incredible stories to consume. I think there's just to introduce kids to the magic of reading. The concept of great stories has been just an absolute joy the last
Yeah.
several years.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Hey, on a leadership front, in your opinion, what are like the 3 most important traits of a leader?
It's an interesting question. Two or three things that stand out here for me, Clint. And I'm equally interested in your own thoughts, and especially given just some of the folks you've had on the show, your own development, which has been fun to watch. I think there's probably the first is that what you do is who you are. There's an oft quoted quip about teach always and when necessary use words. I think that's at the root of what matters most for me. I read a book. Ben Horowitz wrote a book of that title. What you do is who you are, about culture and how much action speaks. There was a section of the book dedicated to Genghis Khan and the residual impact of the culture that Genghis Khan established. And he's a fascinating character to learn from in that respect.
Oh yeah.
Brutal in many aspects, but I love the idea that what we do speaks louder than anything that we say. And so that's at the heart of what I think great leadership is, being willing to act, and oftentimes, going into the fray. There's a bit of risk as you do that. I think um, Another aspect of great leadership for me is someone who understands that stress focuses your attention in ways that good times can't. I'm very much a believer that leadership is on display in an action-oriented fashion most when things do not go right, and there's lots of people who can shepherd um, soft-moving or stable ships. I look at that as more of a management principle. Leadership is someone who, Mike Tyson is quoted as saying, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And I think real leaders show up in the 5 minutes after you get punched in the face. General MacArthur had a quote, no good strategy survives contact with the enemy. And I think that's like same dynamics. I think Mike Tyson's more elementary about it. Um, and then I think there's probably one other aspect of this where good leadership requires, and maybe progress from good leadership requires simultaneous optimism, just endless optimism, faith for the future, and pragmatic pessimism to coexist. And so somebody who's hungry to test and temper an idea and just put it to the metal. I love that aspect of watching great leaders work. That there is not a false sense of or even a real sense of arrogance about the way that they approach their work. This is about solving a problem, being committed to that, and demonstrating that you can be your most harsh critic, and as well as the greatest cheerleader on an idea. That to me feels like an enduring sense of optimism that matters
Yeah.
in times and in driving. Is this am I making sense? And your own thoughts
Absolutely.
here?
I love what you do is who you are. I can't think of anything more true than that, right? And I had an incredible leader. His name is Brandon Craig. He runs a CEO coaching firm down in Phoenix. And he told me one time, and it stuck with me forever. He says, "Who you are being has an effect outside of you." I was like, "Oh, all right." So, like, if you just stay in bed all day and just ignore the world, that actually has an effect outside of you, even though you think it may not, right? And because you got responsibilities and things like that. Or if you walk into a room and you're angry or super negative, that has an effect on that room. It's kind of so. I always love that whole idea of like who you're being has an effect outside of you, and I think Brandon Craig's a genius for putting it that way, or maybe he wasn't the first one, but he's the one who introduced it to me.
Oh, I love it. I think it's a great quote, and you see it. This idea that what you do has impact outside of you. As the company has grown, in the early days, it was really important that I speak first to help provide direction and indicate what the horizon line looked like. In the last 18 months, it has become increasingly more important that I speak last because you're growing a team, and as that team comes together, you sit in a meeting with people who have incredibly high intellect, who are committed to execute on concepts, and if you speak too soon, you limit their ability to push those boundaries themselves. And in some sense, you're taking them out of the batting cage before they've got enough swings. And so this concept, what you're talking about, it's one example that comes to mind for me of a real way that has had to shift over the course and growth of NURSA.
Yeah, that's way interesting. Yeah. Speaking last. When did you get to the point where you're speaking last? You're in a good spot.
It certainly is helpful as a parent,
Yeah.
and for the team, I think it is beneficial as well. We see real fruits from it, but it requires a conscious. I mean, for me, it's a very intentional effort, and the team, our leadership team, does a great job of actively listening in that same capacity that I hope I'm emulating each day as we work together.
Yeah, Curtis, I could talk to you forever. I want to be respectful of your time. So we end every interview with this question, and that is at CEO.com. We believe the chances one gives is just as important as the chances one takes. When you hear that, who gave you a chance to get you to where you are today?
Yeah. I've got maybe two thoughts on this. I think recently I had the chance, and this is a bit of the dynamic for me about Utah and why Utah is important. I went to the Golden Spike Monument, and I started to look at Utah history after visiting there. We're the place that connects the nation with the railroad. Almost a century later, we're the first, a little more than a century later, we're the first state to put money on the table to build the freeway projects, the national defense budget. That began here, and that led to connective tissue across the country. Both of those that enabled the Utah education backbone, the internet, coming to Utah to be as prolific as it was and help create the space that we have today. Both of us to build on. I think it's such an incredible testament. And I get to look out my window every day at those railroad tracks. They run right in front of our building, and it's a solid reminder that no man is self-made. That we stand on the shoulders of generation, and I love that we get that gift. It also helps illustrate how many people I think I could answer this question with. There are dozens. But one of the early indicators for me, one of the early illustrations of this for me, in Idaho, there's a legislation to help enable kids to be able to work on the farm. It's a work release. You can still graduate from high school, get a half day of work in and help. It was born out of a need to help facilitate agricultural growth. I had a teacher in high school, graduated with 52 people. So it's a small school, but a teacher in high school who leveraged that legislation to turn the entire district's IT support staff into a student-led exercise. He was the only district IT employee that was over the age of 18. And for 4 years, you started your freshman year, he would help facilitate through a number of grants. He was always getting grants, but he would help facilitate your ability to become an IT support rep, and then you could work your way up through any number of positions, but treated it like an organization. His name was Daryl Muck, and he made a great deal of difference in my life in this respect. He enabled a space that I could learn from failures. He facilitated the money and institutional enablement that I needed to educate myself about what computers were, what the internet was, and why it mattered, why it would matter for years to come, and set me on a course to be able to work to solve problems at the capacity that we can today. And I'm most grateful. I'm most grateful that I get to stand on Daryl Mock's shoulders.
It's incredible. Curtis, thank you so much, my friend. So great talking to you.
You bet. Thank you, Clint. Stay out of trouble.